Chapter 9, Sacred Blood Creature. Han Sen returned to his room, tied the copper-toothed beast to a cage and put the black crystal in front of it. The beast gobbled up the black crystal greedily. After an entire day, Han Sen noticed some changes to the copper-toothed beast. Its fur had been gray-black like a wild boar, and its fangs had been bronze. Now its fur also started to show a bit of bronze luster, and the fangs had become brighter in color. However, this was not a true mutant copper-toothed beast, which ought to look like a bronze statue. Although this one did show some bronze luster, it was still quite different from a mutant one. It seems that the evolution from a primitive creature to a mutant creature is a more complex process than from ordinary to primitive, so it requires more time than one day, Han Sen pondered. After more than 2 days, its bronze color thickened, but the copper-toothed beast still didn't look like it was going to evolve anytime soon. Han Sen had to let the beast evolve at its own pace, and go kill some primitive creatures for money. Plus, he could also use some primitive geno points. Even if one didn't choose to use the primitive geno points to complete evolution, the more primitive geno points one gained, the stronger the body would become. And the same went for ordinary and mutant geno points. If one could max out on ordinary, primitive and mutant geno points, one's physical conditions would still be far beyond the average level, even without evolution. With the black crystal, it wouldn't be difficult for Han Sen to max out on all 4 types of geno points. At the moment, he wanted to max out on the other 3 before he focused on sacred geno points. Han Sen left his room and walked into the shelter, feeling slightly different. Today the streets seemed to be a lot less crowded than usual. What's going on? Han Sen walked past the plaza and found fewer stalls there than usual as well. People there were all whispering something to each other. Han Sen listened for a while and started to figure out what had happened. A few days ago, someone had spotted a new sacred blood creature near the sunset slope. Somehow the 3 gangs in steel armor shelter all found out about it and gathered at the slope, but the outcome was terrible. The sacred blood creature ran free while a lot of men were killed. Today, Qin Xian, son of heaven and fist guy had reached an agreement to hunt the sacred blood creature together. They also recruited a lot of lone wolves and smaller groups, forming the largest campaign in steel armor shelter in recent years. The 3 gangs were determined to kill this creature. Han Sen suddenly had an idea, so he turned around and ran out of the city. When there was no one around, he summoned the black beetle beast's soul and covered himself in armor. After running for 2 hours, he came to a stone hill west of Sunset Slope. Having finally climbed to the top of the hill, Han Sen took a look in the direction of Sunset Slope. Among thousands of people fighting and yelling, there was a monster with the head of a cow, the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse. It was holding a double-edged golden axe and pushing its way through the crowd. No one could withstand the fierce blow of its axe. Han Sen happened to see the monster swinging the axe at Son of Heaven, who even had his blood-red sword. Son of Heaven did not dare to block the axe. He stepped on his own mount and leaped back a few feet. Roar! The monster's double-edged axe hit the triceratops-like beast soul mount and split it in 2 halves. That broke Son of Heaven's heart. A mutant beast soul mount was very rare, with the same value as a small interstellar spaceship. How is this sacred blood creature so strong? Han Sen was shocked. The sacred blood creature ran and killed thousands of people in a flash, and no one was able to fight back. Even people as strong as Qin Xian, Son of Heaven and Fist Guy didn't dare to engage in a frontal attack. Hit by all sorts of alloy arrows and beast soul arrows, the monster still didn't even get a scratch. When it swung the axe, no one could get close. Such a mighty creature corresponded to Han Sen's impression of a sacred blood creature. The sacred blood black beetle he killed was way too weak compared to this monster. It was only a little stronger than an ordinary black beetle and didn't even feel like a sacred blood creature. People were expecting to trap the sacred blood creature, but now a key buffer was lost as the Mount of Son of Heaven was killed. The sacred blood creature was charging madly, waving the golden double-edged axe and leaving screams, blood, and limbs behind. It took it only moments to rush out of the siege to the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, it even smugly turned around and stood on its back legs, mooing like a cow before it ran into the mountain. #K. It wants to escape. Son of Heaven furiously summoned a green eagle-shaped beast soul, which turned into a green iron bow in his hand. Then he summoned a fiery beast soul in the shape of a giant six-winged wasp as his arrow. Seeing the arrow, Qin Xian and Fist Guy exclaimed, "A sacred blood beast soul of a six-winged wasp." They had joined force with Son of Heaven in hunting the sacred blood six-winged wasp. Son of Heaven was the one who had launched the final blow. They just didn't expect him to be so lucky to have gained its beast soul. There were less than 10 beast souls known to people in the entire steel armor shelter, and many were left by those who already had evolved and gone to Second God's sanctuary. Son of Heaven, stop! It's a beast soul that can only be used once. If you failed to kill it, Luo Tianyang wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Son of Heaven had already shot the sacred blood beast soul arrow with a full draw. The arrow turned into a red lightning bolt flying towards the sacred blood creature. Bang! The sacred blood creature felt the imminent danger and turned around. The wasp arrow shot into its chest and exploded, bursting open its flesh. The monster fell to the ground, losing its vitality as its internal organs and blood sprayed out. "How dare you kill my mount? There is no way I'd let you live after doing that," Son of Heaven yelled loftily, standing like a king, leaving everyone in shock. While proud to see the crowd being impressed, including Qin Xian, Son of Heaven suddenly saw a green shadow shooting down from the sky into the dying sacred blood creature and ended its life. A golden figure immediately rushed down from the stone hill nearby and approached the sacred blood creature. Lifting the golden double-edged axe to his shoulder, the mysterious figure ran towards the mountain in a flash. Su Xiaoqiao recognized Han Sen's unique golden armor in no time and called out loud. Chapter 10, Bloody Slayer. Han Sen was hiding on the stone hill when the sacred blood creature charged in his direction. As he was deciding whether to retreat, he saw Son of Heaven shoot down the sacred blood creature. Anger surged and Han Sen rushed down the stone hill while summoning the bronze crescent spear. He shot the spear at the monster and hit it in the wounded chest, killing the dying creature. Sacred blood bloody slayer killed. Sacred blood beast soul bloody slayer gained. Eat the flesh of bloody slayer to gain 0 to 10 sacred geno points randomly. The voice in the back of his head brought him intense joy. He had just gained another sacred blood beast soul. His luck was too good to believe. However, Han Sen did not have time to celebrate. The body of the bloody slayer was too large for him to take away, but what he could take away was the giant golden axe. The creatures in God's sanctuary could produce certain treasures through special means. People called these treasures gears. Although gears were just like solid items and could not be summoned like beast souls, they could perform as well as beast souls if they were produced by advanced creatures. The bloody slayer was peerless when holding the golden axe, and the axe could easily break normal beast soul weapons and beast soul mounts, so it proved to be an excellent sacred blood gear. Han Sen's goal was to get the golden axe, and the beast soul of bloody slayer was completely unexpected loot. Watching Han Sen running on the mountain with the golden axe, everyone was stunned. #Ker. Son of Heaven let out a raging roar when he realized what had happened. With a black wildebeest summoned as his mount, he rode madly in Han Sen's direction. Behind him, his gang all raced off on their own mounts to chase Han Sen, roaring and rebuking him. Han Sen did not expect the golden axe to be so terribly heavy. With 8 sacred geno points, he was already a lot stronger than before, yet he could still barely walk with the axe, not to mention run. The bloody slayer made it seem so light. How could I run off with such a heavy weapon? Hansen looked back and could already see Son of Heaven and his gang only half a mile from him. Although it was too heavy to carry, Hansen would never leave behind such an excellent sacred blood gear. He suddenly thought of his newly gained beast soul of the Bloody Slayer, took a look at it and suddenly cheered up. Type of sacred blood, Bloody Slayer's beast soul, shape-shifting. Without thinking, Hansen summoned the beast soul of Bloody Slayer and a majestic shadow galloped out, looking just like the monster, only missing the giant axe. The beast soul ran towards Hansen and was instantly integrated with him. His body was transformed into a Bloody Slayer and the black beetle armor changed its shape accordingly, still fully covering Hansen's body as a Bloody Slayer. After all, beast soul armor was not as rigid as man-made ones and could change according to the shape of the body. After shape-shifting, Hansen felt so energetic that the golden axe was now nothing to him. Running with 4 hoofs, he also became incredibly fast. Hansen surged up the mountain at full speed and disappeared, far outpacing the gang. Everyone was speechless, as everything happened so fast. Many smirked as they watched Son of Heaven and others who were still chasing Hansen. *T. Who was that guy? He's got some nerve jumping into the boiling pot. And what loot! In addition to the golden axe, he gained a sacred blood beast soul. Can you imagine how much it must be worth? You think you could buy a sacred blood beast soul just with money? Haha, Son of Heaven must be so mad. A sacred blood beast soul. It would have been his but was taken away. The arrow he used seemed like a one-off sacred blood beast soul. And what did he get in return for such investment? LOL. I'm just afraid Son of Heaven will lose his mind. Didn't expect there to be a sacred blood beast soul. How lucky that guy is. He could never have killed the monster alone. And a dozen sacred blood creatures may not even render a single beast soul. It just happened that he gained everything with the last hit. Who was that guy indeed? Is there such a person in Steel Armor Shelter? I heard someone call him Doll, but not sure. Doll. Interesting name. After less than an hour, Son of Heaven returned gloomily with his gang, but people already knew it was impossible to find someone on the winding mountain trails. Son of Heaven immediately questioned Su Xiaoqiao when he got back. His exclamation, "Dollar," had been a mistake. Su Xiaoqiao had no choice but to tell him everything about how he met Hansen, which wasn't very helpful since all he had was a name, Dollar. Son of Heaven didn't fully believe him, but couldn't do much as Su Xiaoqiao was in Qin Xian's gang. He bitterly led his gang back to Steel Armor Shelter and locked down the shelter, swearing to find Dollar and cut him into pieces. Most people did not learn the name Dollar, while Doll became popular. For a while, Doll, Son of Heaven, Sacred Blood Creature, and Sacred Blood Beast Soul became the most popular topics in Steel Armor Shelter. Chapter 11, Who is Dollar? Hansen was digging a pit at the foot of the mountain, planning to bury the giant golden axe there. Although he escaped the manhunt of Son of Heaven by shape-shifting into the Blood Slayer, there was a limit to how long he could shape-shift. As one of the most powerful beast soul types, shape-shifting beast souls could directly impart significant changes to a human body, which could be unbearable for those with weak genes. The stronger the creature one wanted to shape-shift into, the more geno points and bodies were needed. In general, for primitive beast souls, the number of minutes the body could withstand the shape-shifting was equal to the number of primitive geno points gained. In addition, one mutant geno point could support 10 minutes of shape-shifting with primitive beast souls, and in turn, 10 primitive geno points could support 1 minute of shape-shifting with mutant beast souls. Now Hansen had 8 sacred geno points, which could last him only 8 minutes for shape-shifting as a Blood Slayer. Even counting the ordinary, primitive and mutant genes he had gained altogether, he could shape-shift for less than 10 minutes. It was enough for escaping, but if he were to fight a gang of people, he could only kill 1 or 2 before his time was up. No one could see a sacred blood beast soul if it wasn't summoned, yet the golden axe could not be turned invisible. The person he mainly had offended was Son of Heaven, yet the campaign was a joint one, and the axe should have been the mutual gain of all three gangs. Hence, Hansen had pissed off all of them and could only bury the axe in that spot for the time being. If I could sell the giant golden axe, it should easily bring at least 2 million. Hansen was still excited after burying the axe. A sacred blood gear was not as valuable as a sacred blood beast soul, but still considered almost priceless. If he could sell it, 2 million would be a small amount. As for the sacred blood beast soul, Hansen had not even thought of selling. This was the bedrock of his survival and success in God's sanctuary, and it would be like killing the goose that lays the golden egg if he were to sell it. Returning to Steel Armor Shelter, he saw Luo Tianyang guarding the gate with others. Everyone who tried to enter the shelter was interrogated. "Can you even see what beast souls I have?" Hansen had no fear as he had already buried the golden axe. A young man at the gate stopped him and wanted to do a body search on him, while Luo Tianyang said, "Why waste any time on that scumbag? How is it even possible that he would be $F*#K off?" The young man pushed Hansen away and turned to search other people. Hansen looked at Luo Tianyang with a sneer and went into the shelter. Everyone in the street was talking about what had happened at Sunset Slope. Listening to people calling him doll, Hansen thought, "Damn Su Xiaoqiao. Who told you to call me doll?" He was happy to know that Son of Heaven was furious and strode back to his room. In another room, Su Xiaoqiao stood in front of Qin Xian, almost in tears. "Xian, you need to believe me. I've told you everything I know. I really did not know Dollar, but only saw him once in Zephyr Valley and bought some swift mantises from him, which I gave to my brothers as gifts. Just ask around if you don't believe me. They even helped carry the mantises back from the valley. I am not blaming you. I just want you to contact Dollar, tell him I am willing to buy his sacred blood beast soul and gear, and ask him how much he wants," Qin Xian said quietly. "But I really do not know where he is," Su Xiaoqiao said sadly. "Then go find him. Don't let anyone know about this and go look for him secretly. If you manage the task, I'll reward you." Qin Xian showed Su Xiaoqiao out after she gave the order, not waiting for his reply. After he left, Qin Xian frowned to herself. Who could Dollar be? Is he someone in Fist Guy's gang? Or was the whole thing orchestrated by Son of Heaven? If he really is on his own, can I get him on my side? If I can't, it would also be nice to purchase the sacred blood beast soul and gear. Almost at the same time, Fist Guy sent his men to look for Dollar in secret, trying to buy the sacred blood beast soul and gear from him. Although it was a joint action, the only one who suffered a loss was Son of Heaven. If it had not been for his sacred blood wasp arrow, the bloody slayer would have run away and there would have been nothing for Qin Xian and Fist Guy. Now they could share some flesh of the bloody slayer, so it had gone well for them. However, Son of Heaven lost a mutant beast soul mount and a sacred blood wasp arrow, while being robbed of the sacred blood beast soul and gear. Anyone in his place would have been exasperated. The entire Steel Armor Shelter was looking for Dollar, yet no one connected him to Freak. Son of Heaven also put a price on his head, and even offered to pay a reward for any substantive information. The price was so good that even Hansen wanted to offer himself for the reward. Primitive green-scaled beast flesh eaten. 1 primitive geno point gained. Hansen squatted in the bushes, watching a deep pond near him while chewing meat jerky made from the green-scaled beast. Up until this point, he had gained 91 ordinary geno points, 26 primitive geno points, 0 mutant geno points and 8 sacred geno points. The copper-toothed beast was still slowly evolving, so Hansen could only go out to hunt some primitive creatures, hoping to gain more primitive geno points. Because the black beetle armor would draw too much attention, he could only go deep into the mountains where nobody goes, fearing that Son of Heaven would know where he was. Fortunately, God's sanctuary was so vast that there were many places where humans had never set foot, so it was rather easy for Han Sen to disappear. While staring at the deep pond, Han Sen suddenly heard a distant voice of a man and immediately tensed up. Chapter 12. Who is Scum? Soon, Han Sen saw a young man walking towards the pond in ragged clothes. He was covered with cuts and bruises all over and looked extremely tired. "Friend, there are iron-toothed crocodiles in the pool," Han Sen came out of the bushes and cried from afar. He meant well in warning the young man, but was also afraid that he might alert the crocodiles that he wanted to hunt. This young man looked very tired and seriously injured. If he drank from the pond without knowing the crocodiles were there, he could have gotten killed by the iron-toothed crocodiles hiding under the water. The young man saw Han Sen and became ecstatic. "What is this place? And how do I get to Glory Shelter?" he asked, staring at Han Sen. "Glory Shelter?" Han Sen hesitated, looking at the young man strangely. "We are in Teak's Mountains north of Steel Armor Shelter, and I do not know where the Glory Shelter you mentioned is. I have come so far that I'm now in the territory of another shelter," the young man whispered to himself, looked up at Han Sen, and said with an almost commanding tone, "Take me to the shelter." Han Sen frowned, as the tone of the young man wasn't very polite. Quietly he said, "You go south from here. If you don't walk too slowly, you can reach the shelter before dark. I have to hunt, so I can't accompany you." Han Sen was preparing to go back into the grass, not expecting the young man to suddenly hit him in the back. Losing balance and falling to the ground, Han Sen knocked his head on a rock and started to bleed. "What are you doing?" Han Sen covered his wound and stood up, glaring at the young man. "All I want is obedience, not bulls *T. Take me to the shelter." The young man looked at Han Sen coldly. *#KU. Han Sen summoned his bronze crescent spear and poked it at him. Rubbish basic spear skills taught in integrated compulsory education. Even though my beast souls were all ruined on the way here, scum like you can't compare to me. The young man looked at Han Sen contemptuously, raised one palm and slashed it at Han Sen's spear. The young man's hands looked nothing like hands of a man, but rather like they were sculpted out of a whole piece of white jade, giving off an incredible sheen. Crack! The beast's soul spear was cut in half by his palm as easily as a steel knife cutting through wood. Hyper-Geno art. With only half of the spear in his hand, Han Sen was horrified. Science and technology were of no use in God's sanctuary, but ancient martial arts played an unexpectedly important role. With all the Geno points gained, humans were able to perform some mythical ancient martial arts in the real world. Nonetheless, it wasn't the so-called chi but the power of genes that powered the ancient martial arts. So, the more Geno points gained, the more effective ancient martial arts would be. The research showed that ancient martial arts could stimulate and bring out the potential of genes, offering extraordinary power to mankind. A new type of martial arts was developed called Hyper-Geno arts. Hyper-Geno arts were deeply rooted in ancient martial arts, full of mysteries that couldn't be explained by science. Their practice methods were mostly monopolized by the upper class. The most advanced Hyper-Geno arts were the least accessible. For those who graduated from a public school of integrated compulsory education like Han Sen, Hyper-Geno arts were never an option. Only the advanced schools would teach basic Hyper-Geno arts. If the process of gaining Geno points was compared to turning mud into steel, then Hyper-Geno arts could decide whether the steel was to be made into knives and guns or simply left as a piece of metal. Acquiring genes to make the body evolve was merely acquiring the material, while Hyper-Geno arts taught one to use the material effectively. You know a lot for the scum you are. The young man looked at Han Sen indifferently. This is your last chance. Lead the way or die. Again, he raised the jade-like palm as if he was an executioner about to perform his duty. If Han Sen didn't comply, he would cut his head off. Kiss my ass. Han Sen summoned the black beetle armor and covered himself, kicking the young man with a leg sweep. You asked for it. The young man's face darkened, his jade-like palm chopping towards Han Sen's leg. Clank! Han Sen's leg was knocked away, and there was a white mark on the golden armor. The young man was also forced to step back from Han Sen's kick. Surprised, he looked greedily at Han Sen's armor. It didn't break under my jade skin. Must be sacred blood beast soul armor then. A scum like you having such a nice thing is just a gift sent from heaven. Hand over your armor and I'll spare your life. Han Sen turned around and launched another kick in rage. The young man grabbed Han Sen's leg and twisted it, wrestled him down and came down hard on his back with a knee. Ah! Han Sen uttered a scream, feeling his spine about to break. Scum is always scum, even with a sacred blood beast soul. The young man, named Xuelongyan, continuously hit Han Sen on the back of head, knocking his head into a rock. He cried ferociously, "Surrender the sacred blood beast soul. It's not meant for scum like you. Asshole." Han Sen's blood was burning. He suddenly raised his head and butted Xuelongyan's face with his helmet. Blood splashed from Xuelongyan's nose. He covered his nose and backed off. Han Sen regained freedom and immediately summoned the Bloody Slayer. The moment he turned into the monstrous figure, he threw himself at Xuelongyan. Xuelongyan kept chopping at Han Sen, while Han Sen ignored all the attacks from his tough hands and held him down tightly, the cow-shaped head knocking on his head. Who is scum? Who the F*** #K is scum? Han Sen knocked madly on Xuelongyan's head over and over again. Chapter 13, Jade Skin. While Xuelongyan was struggling to kick Han Sen, the latter ignored him and rammed his face with the cow head. It didn't take long before Xuelongyan's body went limp. When Han Sen finally calmed down, he was already dead, with his face smashed in like a hunk of meat. With the body of a bloody slayer in sacred blood beast soul armor, even those who practiced hyper-geno arts couldn't resist such brutal impact. Han Sen let go of the body, and Xuelongyan fell to the floor like a pool of mud. Having dismissed the beast souls, Han Sen felt a severe pain. It was hurting so much in a few spots that it felt like his bones were broken. Han Sen dreaded to think what could have happened. He was injured so badly, even with the shape-shifting and armor. Xuelongyan's hyper-geno art was really quite something. If he had the same beast souls, Han Sen wouldn't be a match for him. Looking at the dead body, Han Sen hesitated and then searched the body. There was a wallet, with no cash but several crystal credit cards in it, deluxe ones with high credit lines. He also found a memory chip. After some thought, Han Sen destroyed the wallet and credit cards and threw them, along with the dead body, into the deep pond, while keeping the memory chip. Several iron-toothed crocodiles emerged from the water and snapped at the dead body. Soon even the bones were gone. Han Sen was relieved and turned away. Too injured to keep hunting, Han Sen returned to Steel Armor Shelter, enduring the pain. The gang of Son of Heaven were still looking for Dollar, and the bounty had been raised. Unfortunately, no one had any interaction with Han Sen, so no one would know Dollar was actually S-Freak. People were still talking about Dollar on the streets. Han Sen went all the way back to his room and checked out the copper-toothed beast, which had turned bronze in most parts, although the shade was still lighter than a true mutant copper-toothed beast. It probably would take more time for the evolution to complete. Teleporting out of God's sanctuary, Han Sen went to see a doctor. Multiple fractures of the bone were diagnosed, and it took the doctor a long time to fix all of them. Fortunately, Han Sen still had the 10,000 he earned from Su Xiaoqiao, or else he wouldn't even have been able to afford the medical bills. Back home from the hospital, Han Sen closed the door and inserted the memory chip into a smart gadget, trying to find out Xuelongyan's identity. Able to cross the mountains and swamps to reach Steel Armor Shelter and having practiced a hyper-geno art that looked very advanced, Xuelongyan would be a formidable opponent if he still had his beast souls with him and had not been injured. The smart gadget displayed the contents of the memory chip, and Han Sen only had to look for a while before he became wild with joy. Hyper-Geno Arts, it's a tutorial for Hyper-Geno Arts, Han Sen almost laughed out loud. The hologram stored in the chip was a naked woman making odd movements while reciting arcane incantations. With each movement, she would also give some explanation. Although the woman was extremely beautiful, Han Sen was completely attracted to what she was talking about and had no other thoughts. Jade skin. Isn't this the Hypo-Geno art used by Xuelongyan? Han Sen had seen the power of jade skin when Xuelongyan used it, and became even more happy. Having locked himself in the room for 48 hours, Han Sen finally memorized everything in the chip and destroyed it, as it could become a pitfall in the future. After watching the jade skin tutorial, Han Sen had a stronger sense that Xuelongyan must have been somebody significant. Han Sen began to practice jade skin as he was recovering. He had thought before about buying a tutorial of a Hyper-Geno art, after he had earned some money. However, the ones that could be bought were all cheap, unlike jade skin, which he could tell was premium. Knowing that practicing jade skin might eventually expose him, Han Sen still decided to begin. If he missed jade skin, he might never have the opportunity to practice a premium Hyper-Geno art. Having practiced for several days, Han Sen felt his body had become cooler. And his body temperature was indeed 35 degrees Fahrenheit lower than normal. It was not a discomfort, but rather a refreshing feeling. Han Sen felt more fit, as if his body cells were full of energy. His body temperature didn't change further as he kept on practicing. Han Sen became more and more fit and his skin more and more smooth. Han Sen, what have you been up to lately? It's been a while since we met. Let's hang out sometime. The hologram of a smiling handsome long-haired man about Han Sen's age popped out from the comlink. Where are we going? Han Sen was delighted to see Zhang Danfeng, the long-haired guy. They grew up together, and he was son of Mr. Zhang, the lawyer. Come out first. Han Hao and Xueshi are also with me, and we are almost there, Zhang Danfeng said. Sure. Han Sen nodded and went out the door. There was a small private jet parked outside, and Zhang Danfeng was waving to him from the driver's seat. Han Sen got in and saw a girl and a guy talking in the back seats. The girl named Xueshi was very pretty and gentle. And the guy was Han Hao, son of Han Sen's fat aunt. Han Sen's aunt was an aggressive woman, so Han Hao inherited her family name. The four young people had all grown up together. However, after Han Sen's father's accident, he could only go to integrated compulsory education, while the rest were in private schools. Han Sen nodded to Han Hao and Xueshi and sat in the co-pilot seat. Han Hao took a look at him and continued to talk to Xueshi, ignoring Han Sen. Xueshi, you should see it. Dollar just waved his hand and turned into a monster with horse legs, a human upper body and a cow head in golden armor. Son of Heaven and his gang could do nothing but watch him gallop away.